Death is far from an unusual topic when it comes to games discussion. In a game, it typically represents the least of your problems. The loss of progress is the biggest issue you might have. Some games try to give death weight through permadeath mechanics, long times between checkpoints, and gruesome death animations. So, with all the discussion surrounding death in games, I think it's interesting to consider how it is implemented as a system for the player to interact with in a variety of different gameplay forms. Take the popular example of Super Meat Boy. Death is how you learn, acting as both the carrot and the stick. Each time you die, you lose a small amount of progress, but it's such a small amount, in levels that often take less than 10 seconds to complete, that it means next to nothing. Each death individually isn't frustrating, and the rapid pace of the movement ensures that victory is only moments away. Once that victory is achieved, however, you are treated with this. All of your failures come together to form a fantastic show, death upon death upon death, and only one final victory that feels much sweeter for the many preceding failures. Death, as I mentioned before, is both the carrot and the stick, acting as part of the reward while constantly punishing your mistakes along the way. Pair this with the tight mechanics and level design of Super Meat Boy, and you have a formula for a highly successful game. Other games make for, in my eyes, a more interesting use of death as a mechanic. Take multiplayer games where death acts as part of the tug-of-war of multiplayer experiences, for example. Your death represents the other player's victory. That's a simple and obvious conclusion to come to, but there's more to it than a simple binary of life equals good or death equals bad. In TF2's competitive scene, for example, players would often commit suicide to drop ammo, with which a defensive engineer might more quickly set up a sentry. Death in setup means next to nothing. It's irrelevant for most classes in this instance. Unpacking the mechanics that surround death give insight into what exactly it means for the game. As a player dies, they drop ammunition, giving a reward to the player that killed them. However, the reward is not intrinsically attached to the act of killing. It exists regardless of the manner of the death. And so, this reward system is utilized in competitive play for a use completely opposed to that which it was originally intended for. In single-player games, this isn't uncommon either. Sometimes if the game leaves you with very little health, no health packs and a room full of enemies ahead, it's far easier to die and reload an earlier save than to continue on from a significant disadvantage. If you have ever tried to play through the original Half-Life on hard, relying exclusively on autosaves and never reloading a save, you'll really come to understand how much easier it is to die than to press on from the significant disadvantages you frequently find yourself at. Yet, acting as though death were a punishment under the circumstances, even though it isn't, encourages a more dynamic approach to gameplay. The risk of a rush-in with a shotgun is increased, and the weight of each missed shot from your revolver or crossbow weigh heavily on your actions. In this instance, imposing my own rules around death made for much more intense encounters and a more enjoyable experience. Accepting the death of your character or other characters can represent another approach to implementing death in games, this time for an emotional response or attachment to the game. In Fire Emblem Awakening, for example, you're able to pick one of two playstyles, one with a permanent death for the characters should they die in battle, and one where they return after the end of the battle. Each time I play the game, I pick the first option, the so-called classic option, because I feel more invested in my decisions that way. However, I never accept the death of any character when it does happen. I close the game without saving and then boot it up again, restarting the level or chapter from scratch. Even though I am save scumming, I still choose to play in classic mode, because I need to play without any major mistakes in each level in order to continue. It makes for a better challenge with a self-imposed loss state that might be easy to ignore without the permanent death of a character. I think death is more important than life in games. Another player or character's death is typically your goal, and your own death is typically the punishment. If I had enough in the way of knowledge, I would love to talk a bit about death in competitive play, and the way it means something very different than in casual play, but I don't think I'm qualified to do so. Similarly, I don't have any experience in MOBAs or the Souls series of games, in which death is very important as well, so this video is far from comprehensive in scope, but hopefully it offered some insight into different ways games handle death as a mechanic, and the ways in which we might interact with these mechanics. So, if you have any interesting uses of death in games that I didn't cover, put them in the comment section below. I'd love to know your thoughts. And while you're there, let me know how I can improve these videos. Cheers, have a good one. Gunpoint 2 had an interesting death mechanic. If you want to see more about Gunpoint, you can watch my earlier video here.